Okay guys, so let's put an update on what I was working on. So as you can see here, I actually upgraded all of these dynamos to reinforced, and actually more importantly, I also put turbine conversion augments on them. These conversion augments actually, it's easy for me to forget about them, but specifically the turbine conversion augment is only for steam dynamos, but basically makes so that you can just feed in steam into the steam dynamos, and it'll greatly increase their RF per tick output. Like if you take it out, it only makes 100 RF per tick, and I would have to pump in sugarcane. But if I install the augment again into it, it can generate up to 400 RF per tick, right? Steam dynamos, or actually most dynamos, can actually take in a boiler conversion output. So once again, I could have attached this to a magmatic dynamo if I wanted to, but once again, I'm not using pumping lava, or I can put on a reactant dynamo. The simplest case for me is just to put it on a sugarcane, so I can basically turn sugarcane into steam. And then I'm piping that steam into these other dynamos using pressurized fluid conduits. And how it works is that it's 400 millibuckets per tick. So if I take this out, right, it's only 100 RF. This turns into 400 millibuckets, and combined with another steam dynamo, it's up to 800 RF per tick from the steam, because there's 1 to 2 steam to RF conversion. And it's actually a really funny thing, because if you wanted to check if GregTech is actually, or GregTech steam turbines are more efficient, you can check the uses of steam, and there should be a steam map on the steam turbines, as you can see. Actually, that's fascinating. Normally, if you look at the steam turbine, there should be something on the left here, right? Let's say if I just go to cetane diesel, right? If I check the use of cetane diesel, I guess I'm just misremembering then. Okay, forget that. But if I go to steam turbine, right, it says 64 millibuckets per steam, makes 32 EU. So it's the flip side, right? 2 steam makes 1 EU, but once again, when the conversion rate between EU to RF is 1 to 4, then it evens out. So regardless which one you should choose, just choose the one that's, in my opinion, easier to upgrade, because these steam dynamos can have so much room for augments, and they can take up to resonant upgrades. So there's way extra configurability with the steam dynamos. So I would just recommend just use the steam dynamos thermal expansion. They're really OP. What this does mean, though, this actually, funny enough, this kind of bodes well. At this rate, I might not even need to, I don't even need this farmer anymore. I don't need this canola farm. So I had this set up before the weekend. So this might be last week due to editing lag for me. But, you know, I just had like 86K canola just stocking up over the weekend. The other part was that each one produces about 400 RF per tick at max at peak. So that's about 100 EU per tick. So each of these are basically a little bit worse than an MV generator, but they're a lot easier to scale up. Plus, I mean, look how, to get this, I have to make a steam dynamo, right? And then I have to make the conversion kit, which, in honesty, that's actually not that expensive when you want to compare it to something like a steam turbine. Well, actually, I would say this dynamo is a little bit more expensive, but that's, you know, I'm fine with that cost, because I don't want to make these dumb rotors and medium steel pipes and processors anyway. So that was the first thing. And once again, I still have the CEF. What I'm going to do is I might just use RF and then transfer the RF around, because overall these energetic alloy conduits, there's no amperage in RF. So they're usually a lot cheaper to transfer around than using these conductive iron cables. And it's overall just like, look at the friggin' cost of this, right? There's 3 times, and only requires 2 energetic alloy wires. So in my opinion, it's a lot better to transfer things around using RF and then convert locally using a CEF, which is what I did for the Pyrolise oven. And that brings me to my second point. I made a Pyrolise oven just because I wanted to get some phenol, because I wanted to start making better circuits and start mass producing batch crafts of circuits. But nothing else much has changed. I moved the EBF and stuff over here. I have this hooked up to a conductive iron cable. What I'm going to do next is I'll probably just expand this array as I need, and I want to get started closer to applied energistics. That's the goal right now, since I have my, you know, I have my crafting array set up, got my crates, got my cluster mills, so I'm pretty excited for all this. The next part that I'm working on when I decided to record again was just making an infinite clay source. As you can see here, you can get clay from chemically reacting, right? Dust and water. It's funny, that's just a chemical reactor. Oh, this is an electrolyzer. Oh wait, I need a chemical reactor. I like how I'm making all this comment. I don't even have a chemical reactor yet. But as you can see here, if I back it up, right, you can see dust comes from sand, which comes from cobblestone, which comes from You can make an igneous extruder. There's cobblestone generators from nuclear craft, so I'm just using that. It shoves into the macerator, which shoves into the next macerator, which shoves into the next macerator. That should technically feed right off. It should feed right off into a chemical reactor, right? And then I'll just put another water source underneath the chemical reactor, and then I'll feed that into an electrolyzer, which will feed now into more desired outputs, which is electrolyzing clay dust, which should be, sodium, silicon, lithium, and aluminium. And I'll just have a drawer away with void upgrades, so this thing can just run whenever it really needs to. The most important part though is because this is going to get a lot of my silicon, and I just want this to be just a nice, compact, neat setup. All right, so the third thing I wanted to talk about was I also made subscribe for drills drill. I found a drill a couple episodes back inside Lost Cities. Or actually, no, I think it was in the Nether, and it was actually pretty easy. So one interesting thing is that to actually make this drill head, you need stainless steel, which is actually the basis for a lot of HV style machines within GregTech, since stainless steel is the bridge point between MV to HV. And in my opinion, aluminium and stainless steel are very, very close in terms of progression, because to get stainless steel dust, you just need the biggest gate is electrolyzing chrome dust. And that requires an MV electrolyzer. But you make an MV electrolyzer anyway, because when you want to get black quartz. So in reality, in this pack, you can skip MV super quickly. In my opinion, in a matter of just a couple hours of gameplay, and you're just out of MV already. So that's actually what I probably am going to do. My plan is to probably just end up skipping MV altogether and just go straight into HV. And maybe I'll use aluminium for a bunch of the applied energistic stuff. But in terms of with respect to traditional GregTech progression, you don't need MV. But yeah, the drill, amazing. Love it, love it, love it. I put efficiency 5 XP boost on it. I haven't decided if I want to put on auto smelt yet, because I'm getting to the point where I can just probably mine and then just dump things into an ore processing chain and forget about it. So I haven't done that yet. I do know that I just want to eventually upgrade this to Signalum and upgrade this to Resonant once I actually get the thermal elemental mana. And then the last thing I want to show you is the crafting calculator, which is, I'll probably do a little bit side video for this. I'll probably just do a clip later, but long story short, this is a really great way to count how many items you need when you want to do a large batch craft, especially like something with circuits. It's confusing for people because it can have a lot of nested changes or different options. Crafting calculator can help you accumulate all of that. So I highly just recommend using a crafting calculator if just having hard time with all these nested recipes. So yeah, right now I'm going to finish the clay electrolysis and I'll get back to you. Okay, so this is something I wanted to bring up. In order to make the CEF for MV, you need to actually use a circuit good. And I don't think I've done justice when I was explaining the circuit system in GregTech, but let me try to do that now. In Omnifactory, if you just look up circuits, you can see all the circuits that are in the pack with the various ore dictionaries. And why circuits important is because they're one of the biggest micro crafting obstacles you will have to face in GregTech. And from a mechanical standpoint, from a game design perspective, they're there to be as challenges to help first offer, in my opinion, complexity when it comes to automation. It feels nice when you have a proper, circuit progression system, because you can see it being used. They're a complexity and resource gate. The second thing that I think that circuits tend to serve is that they're giant resource hogs. And it might not seem like apparent at first, but let's just I'm not even going to start with the highest circuit, which is like the wetware processor frame. Let's start with something like just a normal mainframe, right? The microprocessor mainframe. So it requires a lot of resources. You can see kind of intimidating, like SMD resistors, but you can batch craft these a lot at a time. The real thing though is that it requires a circuit of a lower tier, right? So you have the microprocessor mainframe, which requires arrays, and an array is considered built out of multiple microprocessors, and a microprocessor is built out of normal microcircuits. What I like is that these aren't the original names of it in GregTech Community Edition. Damien realized that it's not a very good naming scheme, right? So if you look at Crystal Processor Mainframe is made out of crystal processor arrays. There's a thematic cohesion here, which I think is important because the way that it was originally worded in GregTech Community Edition doesn't make sense, especially if you're a new player. You're just going to be like, why is this called an energy flow circuit, and then feeding into this microprocessor. Naming structures, in my opinion, don't need to be realistic. They just need to be fun. Realism is nice to draw upon because humans like to organize things. You draw upon a realistic theme and you try to put it in a video game. It's usually a good source as a rule of thumb because, you know, there's logic behind it. But if you pull something from real life and there's no logic behind it, there's no point. Just rename the damn thing. Going back into it. So that's the second point. Requires a lot of resources. And then third, which is I think the third most valuable option with circuits, is that it gives you options. That's why there's multiple circuits at each level. And this might be a little bit of complexity and players might be like, why do I need to do this? Well, there's a graph that came with Omnifactory, or I think it was on one of the graphics that Damien made a Reddit post on. I don't have it on me right now if it's here in the quest book, but let's just say I look at circuit good. There's 4 tier 2 circuits, and there's a helpful tooltip where it says this is the quote unquote first tier 2 circuit. What does that mean is that this is what you can normally make first, and it's a huge resource hog, right? Because it's made out of 4 primitive circuits, like I said before, or you can use the refined, you can use the electronic circuit, which is made out of 3 electronic circuits and an assembler though. Whereas this is a 4x4. So you can kind of see the thematic progression here, right? And then this is the third tier 2 circuit, which is a refined processor. And look at that. It requires MV assemblers, but it does require less resources before. It also requires higher tier materials like a plastic board. But still, like, once again, as you go further up, this gives you more options with better infrastructure. So there's a reward for having better infrastructure. But that's why I really like circuits. And they kind of do get maligned because they're an intimidating black hole, right? And it's almost a perversion of what modern Minecraft is to some people. But in my opinion, there's so much more content in GregTech and specifically Omnifactory because Damien built upon it. But there's more content in Omnifactory circuit microcrafting progression system than there is in like half of Project Ozone 2, in my opinion. I'm talking about normal mode, but I mean, like, you can build a mod out of these circuits as microcrafting tools. And before people says like, well, that's not fun, why would you make a mod out of microcrafting? Because I want to talk about a separate thing, is that microcrafting does have a place in Minecraft, but most people tend to misuse it. I think the first thing that microcrafting should be used for is to prevent recipe conflicts, right? But then again, this doesn't really apply here because, like, look at this. A lot of these circuits are interchangeable with our dictionary. So it actually goes in the face of recipe conflicts. But that's fine because it's not really a real recipe conflict, it's just there to give you options. The second reason why I think you should have microcrafting is to encourage higher resource production. And you can see that when the advent of compressed cobblestone or compressed diamond blocks started being used in various resources, compressed infinity blocks, right? That kind of gets easily perverted, and a lot of people tend to mistake using compressed blocks and large amount of resources as a form of difficulty. It's not really a form of difficulty, it's just a form of infrastructure scaling. And in my opinion, fun, if I could call it there's diminishing returns of fun on infrastructure scaling. Like building 10, 20 generators, that's kind of fun and it's exciting. You feel your factory growing. Building 300 generators, not so much fun, not so exciting, and kind of a chore, to be honest, if you've done it 20 times already in modded Minecraft. Like, I remember building a huge lava factory in Sky Factory 2.5. And I was just like, this is so cool. Then I had to do it again in Sky Factory 3. I'm just like, I'm over this. There's nothing new here. Third thing that microcrafting can serve a use for is, once again, complexity and infrastructure scaling, which kind of ties into 2, but in a different way, because you kind of do need like a mod, like applied energistics, or some way to mitigate that infrastructure problem, because Minecraft for sure as hell does not have good solutions, in my opinion, to handle complexity of a circuit's caliber. So anyways, that's the basic overview of circuits, and they tier up. Once again, like I say, if you look at a primitive circuit, right? A primitive circuit can be used to craft. It can be used to craft a primitive processor. Then a primitive processor can be used to craft. Oh, I actually think it might just end there. Yeah, so not all the circuits can be used to tier up because it kind of gets picked on what you want next. Primitive processors might not be able to see a use for higher level circuits. So if you want to at LV, want to make circuit, because these aren't even LV circuits, right? You can consider primitive circuits to be a pre-LV circuit, like a bronze. I mean, the steam age was removed, but basically consider a primitive circuit to be a steam age circuit recipe, right? What I mean by that is that you can make it in the steam age for use in LV materials. Technically, you can also make a primitive processor in LV, but in pre-LV, right? And you can use that to make MV level equipment. So you can see here it's used for an MV level advanced item collector. It's used for MV robot arms, MV sensors. And that's where the optional flexibility comes in that I was talking about earlier in circuits, because you could be in, let's say, crystal processor mainframe. This is a circuit superconductor. Let's do this. Microprocessor mainframe, right? This is circuit elite. So you can actually technically use this in IV level stuff, right? However, you can actually make a microprocessor mainframe at HV, right? So you're jumping 2 tiers. At HV, you can make the microprocessor array, right? You can make the microprocessor. You can use that to make EV, because even the microprocessor array, which can be used for extreme voltage stuff, which is 1 tier above high voltage, you can use that, and then you craft it again to make insane voltage recipes. Hopefully I didn't lose you guys in all of that. If I had a graph, I wish I could show you a graph, but I'm really not sure how to like pull that onto the screen in a nice way. But long story short, the reason why I went through that whole entire monologue is because this primitive processor, because I don't want to make these primitive processors anymore. I want to make other types of circuit goods, and you know, I can actually just use the only other one available to me aside from a primitive processor is this electronic processor, which requires electronic circuits, which requires phenolic substrates. So I'm gonna get on that. Oh yeah, another thing I wanted to show you guys is also, once again, just how much more OP RF based counterparts are compared to their GT based counterparts. So once again, if you need to do something, look for the RF equivalent first. And what I mean by this is capacitors and batteries. So this is a flux capacitor reinforced, a very simple recipe, right? Glass block hardened. You can do this without any real machines, to be honest. Well, except maybe for the glass block hardened. But end point is that this contains 90 million RF. And when you divide 90 million by 4, that's like 22.5 million EU. And if you look at the equivalent battery, and by the way, this thing can discharge as fast as possible. There's no limitations of how fast it can discharge. It's really limited by the CEF that you're using. So once again, if you want to transfer things with batteries, like look at like the equivalent battery is like a tier 3 battery is only 300,000 EU. The best tier 3 battery I can think of would be like a lithium battery. So let's look at here. If I look at the ultimate battery, I'm pretty sure there was a recipe to find it somewhere. All right, yeah. So these are all the different types of batteries when you want to make the ultimate power storage as one of the quote unquote creative items. If you look at here, which is the large lithium battery, which I think is the best tier 3 battery, it's only 1.6 million EU. That's versus the 22.5 million EU or 90 million RF of the reinflux capacitor. And it gets even more ridiculous if you upgrade to resonant. So once again, if you need to transfer stuff, make sure you're using the RF equivalents and then converting locally. Normally, that's why in interactions we were so, hard pressed to nerf all the RF equivalents and made sure that GregTech was the only generator. But once again, Omnifactory is not about the same level of grind, I guess, or difficulty that interactions was. So it makes sense why this is still available. And also, I mean, this also makes sure you have an actual brain in your head and that you're looking at your options before you dive into anything. Now, the other last thing I want to show you guys is one cool thing about GregTech, because I just spent some time talking about how GT equivalents are usually shittier. This is one thing that GregTech does way better. So what I have is an electric pump, and if you saw, there's this tooltip that says 640 millibuckets per second as the cover. It implies that it's literally a pump, like you can use that in roll to transfer fluids, and that's true. Like if I right click it onto a machine like the chemical reactor, you can see it adds a cover onto the machine itself. Like if I break this machine, the pump flies off and it's not there anymore. But what this means is that since it's flush with the machine itself, you can put items on top. So if you use a conduit, right, this allows for more compact designs, because if you put a conduit next to it, right, well, this is an energy conduit, but pretend it's a fluid conduit, you have to put it 1 block away. Now, it is more expensive, so you do pay a price for the compactness, but personally, I like the compact setup, right? And what it does is that, well, it's not inputting right now. You need to use a screwdriver to actually configure it. So let's go get a screwdriver. All right, so then, yeah, because what happens if you just right click it normally, you access the chemical reactor. But if you right click with a screwdriver, you can start accessing the settings. And right now it's at an export, which means that it's going to export from the outside. It also lets you have a fluid filter in the machine. So you can actually filter what gets exported out of the machines. For example, if I was using this chemical reactor to make them had something that had 2 fluid outputs, you can have it export to one side and then export to another side. Once again, though, be careful if you use the auto output function, because that could mess up how the covers are functioning. It overrides how the covers work. Put the sucker to import, and you can even set it, right? I can't think of any other piping system having this exact level of control per second, and you could just divide it by 20 to get the flow per tick. But that's insane, right? Like the closest thing you can get is the gates from Draconic Evolution, the flux gates and the fluid gates. So if you really wanted to like check precise methods of how much to be pumped per second, you can do it. I'm going to put it in here, and it's going to pump the phenol into the chemical reactor, right? Easiest thing in the world. And this adds a really nice level of configurability. It's not as OP as like thermal expansion machines, because when I don't have a thermal expansion machine right now, but like in the GUI you can open this up and you can do the side configurations for auto output and input. But at the same time, when you go up to some of the ridiculous level pumps, like if I go to like a ZPM pump, look at that flow through rate, 655 buckets a second. That's insane. That's like the only thing that comes close is pressure pipes. This beats out mechanism pipes in terms of fluid flow through. I mean, if you want it to be insane, you could technically set up a string. You can set up a string of Greg Tech drums. And here's another thing, the pipes and covers can only be attached to Greg Tech machines. So you see how the stainless steel drum, even though it's called localized as a drum, it's actually a Greg Tech machine in terms of how it's recognized. For example, if I take the centrifuge and I do CT hand on it, it looks like a centrifuge to us, but really it's meta, it's Greg Tech machine 150. So like even if I look up machine, right? All these things still show up in JEI. So anything that counts as a machine, you can attach a cover, a Greg Tech cover to. And you know, you can experience the benefits of having pumps. And that's another part too. Robot arms, same exact thing. Well, actually, conveyor belts, they're the equivalent of pumps but to items, and they can do 8 items every second, 32, 16 stacks every second. That's a really insane rate, but it's also very expensive. But still, like, you get the point. Greg Tech does have a lot of redeeming qualities as well. It's not only used as a means of grind, it has a lot of powerful tools itself. But robot arms are also unique because this actually, robot arms, they're not as good as integrated dynamics. I don't think anything will be, but in certain cases, like if you had an IC2 nuclear reactor, it could insert into specific slots of an IC2 nuclear reactor. So you can automate it that way as well. Now, the downside is that once again, these are expensive, but they're a little bit more intelligent and they're kind of underutilized most of the time. In fact, most players I talk to don't even know they exist, which is fair because when Greg Block came out, which was, you know, one of the first 1.12 mod packs, it was using a very early version of Greg Tech Community Edition, and that didn't have covers as functional. Then ArchGenius did some work, made covers functional, and they were part of interactions as well. But even in interactions itself, you know, it didn't see a lot of action due to, you know, their cost and other alternative methods, because we wanted to encourage players to use magic mods. In this specific pack, there's no magic mods to really compete with it, so you can actually find good uses for Greg Tech covers. Okay, so this is one of the applications I want to show you where a pump can be good. So right here, I'm going to attach a pump to the top of the centrifuge. I'm going to use a, oops, I attached it to the front, my bad. Actually, this is a good lesson. If you need to remove a pump, use a crowbar. In fact, if you want to remove any types of cover, just use a crowbar. So let me figure out a good crowbar recipe. Okay, got an iron crowbar. So yeah, you can right click it and the item just flies off the front. And now, going back to what I was talking about here. So if you centrifuge sticky resin, right, it's going to have multiple outputs. So if you look at here, right, it has a sticky resin here, it has a raw rubber pulp and plant balls, as well as glue. You can have the pump just export the glue off the top. And once again, you can also do this with a fluid conduit, but I had these extra pumps laying over, and this is not a very fast, I don't need a fast flow through rate. And then what I can do next is wrench the bottom of the centrifuge to auto output items, and so the items go down there and then the fluid goes up. It can be done, there's like 5 ways to skin this cat, right? But this was just one of the alternative ways, and I like it just because it's compact, right? It's flush with the side, and it makes this look less of a mess than it really is. So one thing in the recent updates was that Damien added super sound muffler to the pack, which is good because I'm probably going to use it to make these cows shut up in the background. But I just, you know what would be a really funny like prank mod would be, like, what happens if someone just made a mod that it was a ball gag? You just attach the ball gag onto animals and that'll just cut them off from making sound. See, I don't know if that can like go on CurseForge, because I don't know like if CurseForge has like an adult oriented mod thematic restrictions. That was horribly worded, but you know what I mean. Just because, okay, I'm gonna be honest here, like a lot of modding communities have pretty strong limitations, don't have a lot of censorship, or at least the prominent modding communities. So let's see here, I want to do cow. Yeah, so cow ambient, let's add that to the blacklist. So these guys are effectively gagged. Obviously Skyrim at the forefront is notorious. I guess you can't, I can see why you can make adult mods with Skyrim, right? Especially with the better bodies mods, because it just has a lot more graphical capacity to interest those who wanted to mod, whereas Minecraft's graphical capacity is this. I mean, I guess you could have machine porn, which is like which is modern Minecraft to some degree, but I'm not saying, all right, before people take this out of context, I'm not saying like, oh man, someone should make an adult Minecraft mod so I can research it. I'm not. I'm just curious, like, have there really been no attempts? That's the biggest question I really wanted to know. And I guess if there have been attempts, I would like to see them. I'm just curious what these attempts at making adult mods in Minecraft would be. It could also just be the age range. Maybe there's no money in it, but people don't really mod for money in the first place. So I guess maybe it's the age range, maybe I guess if you wanted to make an adult mod, there are just way better options than using Minecraft. But given the size of Minecraft's, I don't know. It's Rule 34, man. Like, if it exists, there's porn of it, right? So like, why is there no like why is there no Minecraft porn? I can't believe I just asked that question. But you know, food for thought. You gotta ask the tough questions in life. That's how you get ahead. For what it's worth, do not link me adult Minecraft mods if they do exist in the comments. No, don't. I'm serious, guys. Don't.